Hi, I'm Mary Donahue. I'm a historian and I serve on the board of the Jewish Historical Society. So today I want to tell you a little bit about this wonderful summer program that we had last summer, where we worked with 2 interns from Trinity College. The project got started because I had seen a slide talk by our town historian, Tracy Wilson, and Tracy found 10 documents, and in those 10 documents she tries to tell you the 250-year history of West Hartford. And every time I've seen that presentation as a historian, I sit there and I try to second guess her. Like, oh, I don't know, could I think of a better document to represent the 1860s? You know, and so far I have not been able to second guess her. But it led to a conversation that I had with Estelle about the fact that we have a fabulous collection, and there's nothing more that I would like to do than to go and open all of those gray archival boxes and rummage around in them and look in them. And I don't think people know some of the fabulous things that we have in the collection. We've used a lot of them to good effect, especially in programs for the Jewish community. But we wanted to start to come up with great ideas and information about our collection for a wider audience as well. So Trinity had a brand new program run by Dr. Jack Doherty, who's a friend of the Historical Societies, at the Hartford Engagement and Research Center, which is in downtown on Constitution Plaza. So they funded, they paid the students over $3,500 for 8 to 10 weeks worth of work, and assigned 2 students to us. We had a young man and a young lady. We had 1 Jewish student, 1 non-Jewish student. And so for us, it was interesting to have people in their 20s look at our materials. So the goal of the project was for them to go through our archives and our collection and try to identify 10 things that could tell the larger story of the community. Now, I'll tell you the results in a minute. We ended up with more than that, but the project was to look through the archives and try to relate the story of the Jewish community in 10 interesting, unusual, or little-known objects or documents that could tell big stories. So the selected items could then be featured on digital exhibits on our website, our social media, a traveling exhibit, and maybe a PowerPoint presentation that would be suitable for the general public, so that when Estelle goes out, she would have a PowerPoint that she could bring with her and really make a lot of interesting points, both within the Jewish community and outside the Jewish community. So our first effort with the students was for them to consider what those big themes are, and so these are some of the themes that they looked at. They considered. They worked with our archivists. They learned proper archival practice. Every week they had a workshop with a Trinity professor to learn how to do research and to document things properly. I worked with them to learn how to use Ancestry.com and newspapers.com. Lance was here. We had a session where the students presented their themes and some of their preliminary findings. And then Lance and I tried to throw rocks at them and say, well, maybe you missed this important thing over here, or, you know, did you ever think about this? So we really had an extensive discussion and review of our collection among the staff members and the board members that were involved. We did have Dr. Wilson come in and have an afternoon with the students and explain to her, she explained to them how she winnowed down her choice of the 10 documents for West Hartford history and talked to them about the broader scope of West Hartford and the Jewish community. And it really gave us an opportunity to re-examine the relationship between our artifacts and our documents. We created a reservoir of well-researched text that can be pulled from and used online, and artifacts were photographed. Let's see, I'm going backwards. Yael made this look easier than it is. So I wanted to just give you some highlights of things that we discovered in the archives. In each case, there's an artifact, and then there are documents and photographs that correspond with that artifact. So I didn't bring all that material tonight in the PowerPoint, but just to give you some sort of fun highlights of things that the students worked on and discovered. So this is one of my favorites. This is Sophie Tucker's feather. And we want to look at this in the mind, with that sort of mindset of the William Blake poem that says that you can see the world in a grain of sand. So we want to look at everyday objects that can tell a big story. So with this object, we've got blackface, which is in the news right now. We didn't know that when we had the students this summer. Cultural appropriation, fat shaming, and the women's body positivity movement. Those are all reflected in this artifact. This is the type of artifact that can help tie today's pressing issues to our history. So you say, okay, so how does blackface figure into this, or body shaming? This feather belonged to the incredible Sophie Tucker. She spent her childhood here in Hartford before becoming a famous singer, and it represents her vibrant and powerful presence in the music industry. Her entertainment career is one of the great American rags to riches stories. By the virtue of her prestigious voice, she ascended from singing for tips in her parents' restaurant in Hartford to headlining as the last of the Red Hot Mamas in New York City's Palace Theater and then in vaudeville. She was a Hartford native to the end, and she always maintained ties to her hometown. And with this item, what we're looking at is something that helps represent her career. She was not considered conventionally attractive. As a matter of fact, Sophie Tucker says in her autobiography that she was told she was too fat and ugly. And by the way, Lady Gaga was told the same thing. Her first employer made her wear blackface and put on a Southern accent to compensate for what was feared to be an unattractive face and figure. Tucker reluctantly obliged until she didn't. Her first, while on tour, she accidentally forgot her blackface makeup kit, and she was forced to go out on stage in her own appearance. She made a bold proclamation before the audience. You can see I'm a white girl. Well, I'm going to tell you something more. I'm not Southern. I'm a Jewish girl, and I just learned the Southern accent during blackface for 2 years. And now, Mr. Leader, please play my song. Well, after that, she never put on blackface again. We have in our collection an Ebony magazine, which was an African-American publication from 1951 that features Sophie Tucker and the jazz great Josephine Baker on the cover. Sophie thanks black performers and songwriters for providing inspiration in her career and for their music, ragtime, jazz, and the blues, all of which influenced her performance style deeply. From there, Sophie Tucker's popularity exploded on an international scale. She was known as the last of the Red Hot Mamas. She included risque and fat humor in her act, which is similar to Rebel Wilson or Amy Schumer today. And in subsequent years, she diversified and appeared on radio and television programs. The feather here was part of one of her famous, elaborate, high couture costumes. She took great care to dress in exquisite clothing, the quality of which was meant to appeal to women in the audience. So if she thought if she was not going to be considered a beautiful woman or conventionally attractive, she was going to maximize everything she had, and she had exquisitely designed clothes so that she would look stunning on stage. So that's what this feather can tell you, and those are the kind of links we wanted the students to make with the pieces that we have and the bigger stories that they can tell. So let's look at a couple other things. This beautiful fan is belonged to Annie Fisher, the first female superintendent of the Hartford Public School District. She was, we have a photograph of her. She was a tiny, petite, absolutely beautiful woman. But she obviously had a lot of chutzpah and a lot of moxie, because she became, she's the first female superintendent and principal in Hartford. She developed programs for special education, for, English as a second language, and student accommodations. She positively impacted students, immigrant students, African American students in Hartford, and gave the young children the tools they needed to learn and flourish within an educational setting. So this is just a piece that belonged to her that could tell that bigger story of a woman in a very male-dominated field who rose to the top of her field. This box holds the ashes of a burned mortgage deed from Emmanuel Synagogue. Emmanuel, of course, opened in 1920, and it's played an important part in Jewish life in the greater Hartford since its establishment. And this is the kind of piece that can tie into our big collection of artifacts, photographs, oral histories about the history of synagogues here in Hartford. Even these doorknobs feature religious symbolism that can be explained in an exhibit and were produced in America. These little enameled boxes are really interesting. In the 1930s, as the Hartford Jewish community endeavored to erect a new site, and buy a new site and erect a new building for Congregation Beth Israel in West Hartford, these little collection tins were developed to help move the fundraising along. And they're enameled, they're brass, they're really great little objects, very attractive. Their final move was from Hartford in 1936 to a new building in West Hartford. So these are part of that Western movement of the Jewish community from Hartford to West Hartford and out even further today. In addition to these small artifacts, objects, the collection holds 3 landmark documents. One dates to the Congregation of Beth Israel's founding in 1847 when the congregation contracted with Moses Strauss as their cantor and ritual slaughterer. Strauss received dues from various members of the congregation in exchange for his service. Given that date, we think that Strauss was the first to hold that position. The second and third document in our collection date to 1933 and 1936 respectively. The 1933 document details exercises held at the laying of the cornerstone of the new temple. And so the little boxes that were collection boxes were successful. And in the 1936 document celebrates its opening. Congregation Beth Israel's Farmington Avenue location followed the Jewish community as it gradually moved from Hartford to West Hartford. This is the ceremonial bag used to hold a prayer shawl before you go to synagogue. I feel like I'm telling you things you don't already know, but you know. Now, we have some exquisite textiles. We have ritual and religious objects like this. This one's very personalized. It has the date on it. We know who it belonged to. We know how it was made. And we also have ritual textiles that were used in synagogues. And a lot of those, I think, even 30 years ago when I started working with Marcia Lotstein here, at that time, even then, they were considered, well, maybe those are kind of gaudy. But now those are really considered a folk art. That big metal embroidery that you see on those, and the golds and the reds and these bright colors are now considered to be women's artwork and folk art. So we're happy to have this bag. And this can tell you about ritual objects and what reverence and what one needs to do to belong to a synagogue and be a religious person in the community. This is a trowel from Mount Sinai, which opened in 1923. It really embodies the strength, tenacity, and versatility of the greater Hartford Jewish community. Originally located on Capitol Avenue in Hartford in an old mansion, it was opened to serve the medical needs of the Jewish community of greater Hartford because of discrimination. In 1941, the hospital moved to the north end of Hartford on Blue Hills Avenue. In the early 20th century, Jewish doctors, nurses, as well as patients were discriminated against in hospital settings. These discriminatory practices led to the founding of the Abraham Jacob Hospital, which would later become Mount Sinai to accommodate the needs of community members. And this can open a conversation about how people were treated in the 20th century and what measures people had to take to even receive health care. And that's still a pressing issue today. This is just a charming little piece. It's a handmade toy. It's made out of, it's a dreidel. It's made out of lead. As the students were appalled to find out it's made out of lead, and they go, oh my gosh, we could never make toys out of lead now. So, but it's a charming piece, I think.
Mary, that was my grandfather.
Oh, there we go. Terrific.
We had them. I don't know what we did with them.
Well, we seem to have one of them. Well, you know, it's charming, and it's that multi-generational passing down of knowledge and traditions. We have things like naturalization documents. Now, this one is an Austrian German Jew, so this is 1883. And the students learned the two major threads of Jewish immigration: Austrian, German, Bavarian Jews in the earlier period and Eastern European Jews later. They also found artifacts that we're going to use as part of the collection for the advent of moving Soviet Jews, of course, to this area. So we have a great collection of pieces like this. And now you can go, I'll tell you a little bit about something like this later, but now we can go on Amazon.com, or not Amazon, that's another thing, Ancestry.com and newspaper.com, and find so much information about these people.
Mary,
That. Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of confusion between about Austrian when someone says they're from Austria, especially when it relates to the middle 1800s, because the Austrian Empire
Right.
encompassed a good part of Poland and Eastern Europe. So he may have come from Eastern Europe or Poland rather than Germany and Austria. So it's it's hard to tell.
And that's a really good point.
What he said, so that it's on record that otherwise will be.
Okay, so the comment was that the Austrian Empire, Austrian-Hungarian Empire, and the sort of Germanic states were, there were a lot of little principalities. They were kind of fluid, and they covered a lot of territory. So what we might think of as very Eastern Europe in Poland might have been part of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. And that's where things like Ancestry.com, we taught the students how to look individual people up and try to find out as much as we can about them. A lot of times in the census records, they'll state what country they came, what country at that point, what it was called then when they came, who they brought with them, let's see, what language they speak. And it was interesting because the students were surprised that for language spoken, sometimes it would almost never say Yiddish. It would say Jewish or Hebrew, you know, and we assume they mean Yiddish. So the students learned a lot there. Now this is a later one. This is a U.S. naturalization document for a Russian immigrant from 1922, and something that I'm planning to work on myself a little bit, but I think it'd be interesting to contrast what were the requirements to become a U.S. citizen in the 1880s, what were the requirements in the 20s, and what are the requirements now? Because I think my people just walked off the boat. So I don't think there was a lot of paperwork involved, whereas it's gotten progressively harder and more difficult to actually become a naturalized citizen. So that was something the students worked on and really thought about too. Now this isn't a great photograph, but this is a vibrant poster that's about 24 by 36 or a little bit bigger, 30 by 40 maybe. And it's for the arrival of an important national Zionist, Weitzman, who came to Hartford. He was the, let's see, let me get his title right. He was the elected president of the World Zionist Organization. I wanted to get that right. A year earlier, and Weitzman came to Hartford. He was in New York. He came to Hartford. They were raising money in the 1920s. He was joined here in Hartford by the physicist Albert Einstein, and we have a photograph in the collection of them in Hartford. And this poster is absolutely beautiful, and it's something in our collection that right now it's in a it's framed nicely and it protects it, but it's not archivally matted. It's just in a frame like I would use at home. It's something in our collection that we really should, for example, prioritize to have it archivally matted so it doesn't deteriorate. But I started to do a little research on the company that made it, and it was produced by a company that made movie posters. So it's that very bright colored, cheap paper idea where, and a lot of those movie posters now are very collectible. Now this one, I couldn't find any other information on, and it needs to have some more research done on it. But it's just fabulous because it's got the two flags, it's got this important Zionist leader, national leader, and there was a very, Steve Thornton from Shoe Leather History will tell you that there was a very strong Zionist movement here in Hartford. They were fundraising for the Palestine Restoration Fund, which was intended to provide an economic base for Jewish settlement in Palestine. Hartford's rabbis declared May 22nd a holiday with near unity on that. Jewish businessmen closed for the day, as thousands lined the streets to watch Weissman and Einstein pass in a 500-car motorcade. And so this poster really signifies the importance of that political and international movement here in Hartford. And then the last thing is one of my favorites. This is a potato bag. And it was handed to me at a lecture in a little plastic grocery bag, and they said, the person who handed it to me said, this has to be saved. It's a schmata, but it has to be saved. So I said, okay. And I brought it to Estelle, and the bag is emblazoned with the Statue of Liberty. The iconography on this is just fabulous. And at the bottom, it has Harry Liebman, who was a Jewish farmer in Ellington. So Liebman's success story encapsulates the story of Connecticut's Jewish farmers. Born in 1891 in Russia, he immigrated from Russia to Liverpool, England, the home of the Mansion House Relief Organization in 1906. And the Mansion House is mentioned in the Hartford Courant as early as 1882. So there's a connection with this gentleman right from the Hartford Courant to England. When he became a naturalized citizen in 1910 at age 19, he was already a farmer in Connecticut. And interestingly, his wife did not become a naturalized citizen until 1924. She had been married for years. She had 2 children who were born in the United States by then. And I just wonder if she was concerned about the new federal legislation that restricted immigration. So she thought maybe the time is I should get my naturalization papers filed. So his wife becomes a citizen in 1924. By 1940, Liebman estimated that his farm was worth $6,000, which was an impressive amount near the end of the Great Depression. And this is a case where we're lucky enough now that his naturalization papers, as is his wife's, are now online. And they tell you the exact ship they went on, where they left from, where they went to, when they got here. And it also, in his, in 1906, you have to renounce any patriotism to your previous country. So on his it says that he rejects Tsar Nicholas II, Tsar of all the Russias. And then by the time it's 1924, his wife, who was also from Russia, she just renounces the present government of Russia. So there's a big change internationally. And then the last thing that I want to show you, and many people here probably had one of these, is a GFox credit card. The students thought this was fascinating because they pay everything they can with their phone, because you can go to Starbucks and tap your phone. So this idea that an individual department store would have their own credit card just seemed to be so archaic and in the distant past to them. But we think it's from the 60s or 70s. It was probably just after the May Company's acquisition or just before. Now, credit cards were a novel technology in the time. GFox was likely an early adapter of credit card technology, and this card would have likely been prized by the owner because at that time, it was considered hard to get these department store cards because you were paying directly to the company and they knew what kind of credit you had. So this gave the students an opportunity as an object to really look at the history of Jews as department store owners in Connecticut, a window into the GFox story, a window into the Arbach story, and then into women's history. So this little object can actually tell you a lot about the economics on Main Street, the rise of the Jewish businessmen in Hartford, as well as women's history with Mrs. Arbach's direction at the company. So those are just a highlight reel, so to speak, of what the students worked on. But every one of these objects can be used to tell a huge story. So thank you so much, and I want to thank Estelle for applying for that grant and receiving it.